It was the night before my wedding. Late, past 11, and the house was finally quiet after a day of preparation that had moved through every room like a tide. My grandmother was sitting on the edge of my bed, her hands folded in her lap the way they always were when she was about to say something she had been holding for a long time. She was 81 years old. She had survived things I had only read about. She had rebuilt her life twice, in 2 different countries, starting from almost nothing both times. And she had never once, in all the years I had known her, spoken to me directly about money. She looked at me for a long moment without speaking, and then she said, very quietly, as if the walls themselves should not hear it, "Naomi, what I am about to tell you is not about love. Your marriage will have love. What I am telling you is about the house. The house must know who is the keeper of its spirit. If the house does not know, the money will not stay. It has nowhere to anchor." I did not fully understand her that night. I was 24 years old, and I was thinking about the next morning, about the ceremony, about the dress that still needed one more adjustment. But I wrote what she said in a small notebook before I slept, the way she had taught me. You write the things that carry weight before you sleep, or by morning the weight is gone and only the words remain, emptied of what made them matter. I have thought about what she said almost every year since then, and the longer I have lived and the more families I have sat with in my work as a teacher and guide, 35 years now in communities across 3 continents, the more precisely I understand what she was pointing at. She was not speaking about budgeting. She was not giving me a financial strategy. She was transmitting something older than any system I have ever studied. A law, a household law that Jewish families have known for generations and that the modern world has almost entirely forgotten. My name is Rabbi Naomi. The lineage I carry is not academic. It passed through women like my grandmother, who knew things in their bodies that I eventually found encoded in the ancient texts. What they practiced as habit, the sages recorded as principle. And today I am going to give you both, the principle and the practice. But I must warn you, what I am going to share will contradict something you almost certainly believe about money, about who holds it, about what makes it stay. If you are the kind of person who will defend what you already believe, rather than listen for what you have not yet considered, this video will not serve you. If you are willing to hold your current understanding loosely for the next 20 minutes, to hear something that is 3,000 years older than the advice you have been given, then stay with me. Stay until the end. The last thing I tell you is the one my grandmother said last, and it is the one that will change your house. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments what surprised you most as I introduce this teaching, even if it is just the fact that your grandmother never told you something like this, even if it is the feeling that you have been waiting for this without knowing you were waiting. Whatever moved in you in these first few minutes, write it below. I read every single comment, and naming what you felt is the first act of receiving what is coming. Now, let me begin with what most people believe, and let me show you, one by one, exactly why those beliefs are the walls that are keeping the money from staying. The first myth is this, that financial stability in a household is primarily determined by how much comes in. You have heard this your whole life in 100 different forms. Earn more, grow your income, increase the revenue. The solution to financial struggle in the modern understanding is always upstream. More input, more inflow, more at the source. And I am not saying income does not matter. It matters. But I have sat with families earning 6 figures who cannot hold money past the middle of every month. I have sat with families earning a fraction of that whose provision moves like a steady, quiet river, never dramatic, never abundant in the flashy sense, but always present, always enough, always slightly more than expected. The difference between these families was not the amount coming in. It was what the house was doing with what arrived. The myth is that the problem is upstream. The truth is that most households have a downstream problem, a leaking vessel. And you can pour rivers into a leaking vessel and it will never fill. The second myth is that the primary financial energy in a household belongs to whoever earns the most. This is perhaps the most expensive belief in the modern world. And I say expensive deliberately, because I have watched it cost families, real families, families I have loved and counseled and wept with, an incalculable amount of accumulated provision across their lifetimes. The one who earns the most controls the financial decisions. The one who brings in the income sets the tone. The one with the salary makes the rules. This is the modern framework. It is logical. It is also spiritually backwards, and I want to show you exactly why. The third myth is that talking about money openly and often is a sign of a healthy financial relationship in a household. Modern financial therapy encourages this: transparency, communication, regular money conversations. And there is truth in the general direction of that advice. Silence from shame is genuinely destructive. But the tradition draws a distinction the modern world has entirely collapsed. There is a difference between intentional speech about money and unguarded speech about money. And the families that lose provision generation after generation are almost always the families where money is spoken about at every moment, in every register, without discernment about when and how and to whom and with what intention. Let me now give you the truth. The truth that my grandmother was transmitting that night, that the sages encoded in the texts, that 3,000 years of observed household reality has demonstrated again and again. The truth is this: every household has a spiritual keeper. In the Jewish tradition, this role has a name: the Ba'alat Habayit, the mistress of the house, the one who holds the spirit of the home. This is not a gender prescription in the modern sense, and I want to be precise here so that you hear what I am actually saying. The Ba'alat Habayit is not simply the woman of the house. She is the person, in any household of any configuration, who carries the primary spiritual frequency of the domestic space, who sets the emotional tone of the home, who by the quality of her attention and her intention determines what the house feels like from the inside. And in the tradition's understanding, what the house feels like from the inside is the primary determinant of whether provision stays or leaks. My grandmother was not telling me to manage the budget. She was telling me to become the keeper of the spirit of my house. To understand that this was my primary financial role, not despite the money, but because of it. Because in the ancient framework, the financial health of a household is downstream of its spiritual health. And the spiritual health of a household is held, day by day, in the invisible work of the person who tends its atmosphere, its rituals, its silences, its rhythms of welcome and of rest. This is what the modern world has abandoned. We have made money management rational and financial planning analytical and income optimization systematic, and all of those things have their place. But we have forgotten entirely that beneath all of those rational systems there is a spiritual infrastructure, and that infrastructure is either tended or neglected. And the families that stay wealthy across 3 generations are, without exception, the families where someone is tending it. Now let me give you the proof, not from sentiment, from 3 directions. The first is historical. Across the centuries of Jewish displacement, across the expulsions, the forced migrations, the economic strippings that punctuated every generation of this tradition's history, There is a documented pattern that historians have noted and struggled to explain purely in economic terms. Jewish families who maintain their internal household practices, their Shabbat rhythms, their table rituals, their specific protocols around food and money and speech, rebuilt their financial lives with a consistency and a speed that defied their circumstances. Families who lost those practices, who assimilated entirely into the economic frameworks of the surrounding culture, tended to lose not just their cultural identity, but their financial resilience as well. The sages understood that the household practices were not decoration. They were the spiritual infrastructure of economic survival. And the Ba'alat Habayit, the keeper of those practices, was the most important financial figure in the family. Not the one with the largest income, the one with the most consistent intention. The second proof is personal. I have already told you about my grandmother, but I want to give you the specific moment when I understood, in my own household, what she had meant. It was 6 years into my marriage, a period when my husband's work had contracted sharply and my own income from teaching was uneven, and we were in the kind of quiet financial pressure that does not announce itself dramatically, but sits in the background of every conversation. I had been handling the stress the way modern people handle it, tracking, calculating, discussing, reviewing, worrying aloud in the evenings after the children were in bed. And one night I remembered what she had said, about the house knowing who is the keeper of its spirit, about the money having nowhere to anchor if that role is not held. I stopped the evening conversations about money, not from avoidance, from intention. I changed what the house felt like in the mornings, in the kitchen, at the table. I became deliberate about the atmosphere I was creating in the domestic space. Within 3 months, and I frame this as what I observed, not as what I promise, something loosened. Not a windfall, a shift in direction. A quality of provision that had been absent began to quietly return. My husband noticed it before I named it. He said the house felt different. That was the beginning. The third proof is from the community I have served. Over 35 years of guiding families, I have never once seen a household find genuine financial stability without someone in it taking on the role of spiritual keeper, consciously or unconsciously. The families I have watched rebuild from true financial ruin, not setback, not difficulty, but real collapse, have always had one person who held the frequency of the house steady while everything else was unstable, who continued the rituals, who maintained the Shabbat table even when there was barely enough on it, who refused to let the atmosphere of the household be defined by the fear of what was happening outside it. That person was doing the most important financial work in the family, and they were almost never the one writing the checks. Now here is the framework. 3 elements: specific, practical, rooted in the tradition. These are the practices of a Ba'alat Habayit, a keeper of the household spirit. You do not need to be Jewish to apply them. You need only to understand why they work and to apply them with exactness. The first element is the threshold practice. In the tradition, every entrance to the home carries spiritual significance. The mezuzah at the doorpost is not decoration, it is a declaration. But beyond the mezuzah, the sages taught that the keeper of the house should develop a conscious practice of transition at the threshold, of shifting their internal state at the moment of entering the home. When you cross your threshold, you are not simply walking from outside to inside. You are entering a space you are responsible for spiritually maintaining. The practice is this: at the moment of entry, Every time, not occasionally, pause. One breath, one intentional thought. Something you are grateful for about this house. Something you are choosing to bring into it with your presence. This practice, held consistently across weeks and months, changes the spiritual signature of the threshold itself. And in the tradition's understanding, the threshold is where provision makes its first decision about whether to enter or to pass by. The second element is what I call the table frequency. The keeper of the household sets the emotional and spiritual tone of every shared meal, not through performance, through genuine interior state. Before the family gathers at the table, the Ba'alat Habayit, whoever holds this role, takes a single private moment of intention. Gratitude for what is on the table, however simple. An interior opening, a quality of welcome, extended toward what has been provided. This is not prayer in the formal sense, though it can be. It is the deliberate act of receiving what has been given before distributing it. In the Kabbalistic framework, this is the difference between a vessel that welcomes and a vessel that endures. Both sit at the same table. Only one of them is a channel. What I have observed is that families where this practice is held, where someone at the table is genuinely and interiorly grateful before the meal begins, eat differently. The conversation moves differently, and over time, the experience of provision in the household changes, because the frequency at the table is the frequency the household broadcasts. The third element, the one my grandmother saved for last that night, the one I am saving for last today, is the practice of speaking the financial future of the household in private, before sleep, in the direction of the divine. Not to your partner, not to your children, not on social media, in private. Before sleep, which the tradition understands as the moment of closest proximity between the conscious and spiritual selves, the keeper of the household names aloud what she is calling into the home, what she is asking to be restored, what she is trusting is already in motion, even if it has not yet arrived in the physical world. The language is not begging, the language is not pleading. It is the language of someone who understands the structure, who knows that the spiritual precedes the physical, that the declaration made in the right state of consciousness at the right time of day plants a seed in a field that operates by laws older than any financial system. My grandmother did this every night of her married life. She told me so. She said she had never once missed a night, even in the worst years. Even in the years when what she was asking for seemed impossible from every rational angle. She said, "The night prayer for the house is not about hope. It is about maintenance. You maintain the channel the way you maintain the house. You do not stop because the floor is clean. You continue because continued attention is what keeps it clean." What I have shared with you today is one piece of a larger system. The three elements I have given you, the threshold practice, the table frequency, and the nightly declaration, are the foundation of the Ba'alat Habayit role as I have understood it across decades of study and practice. But the full architecture is more complete than what one video can hold. The Prosperity Covenant, my complete program for building a spiritually and financially aligned household, goes deeper into each of these elements, adds the specific Hebrew phrases that carry the weight of the tradition in each practice, and covers the seasonal rhythms of the Jewish year as they relate to household provision. Which weeks are spiritually open, which require specific protection, which carry the energetic signature of harvest, and which of preparation. The link is in the description below. If what you received today felt like something you had been quietly waiting for without knowing you were waiting, that recognition is not accidental. It is the beginning of something. Do not let it pass. Now let me tell you what to expect in the next 48 hours, because there will be a test and I want you to pass it. When you begin holding the role of spiritual keeper of your household, When you start the threshold practice, when you change the table frequency, when you begin the nightly declaration, something will happen within the first week that will make it feel unnecessary. Things will seem fine. The pressure will ease slightly, not dramatically, and a voice will say, "This is probably just coincidence. This is probably just a good week. I do not need to keep doing this if things are already moving." That voice is the most dangerous moment in the practice, because what it is describing, that slight easing, that small movement, is precisely the first fruit. It is evidence that the channel has opened a crack, and the crack will widen if you continue and close if you stop. The families I have watched abandon this practice at the first sign of improvement are the same families who sit with me 2 years later asking why things stagnated again. You do not stop tending the fire because the room is warm. The room is warm because you have been tending the fire. And in the same way, if in the first week things feel harder rather than easier, if a financial pressure arrives that feels like a contradiction of everything you are doing, I want you to recognize that too for what it is: the test of the vessel. The tradition is asking, do you hold this role only when it is easy, or do you hold it because you understand why it must be held? The keeper of the household spirit does not stop at the first pressure. She holds more steadily because of it. That steadiness is the practice. That steadiness is the inheritance you are building. Tell me in the comments what surprised you most in today's teaching, what landed differently than you expected, what the inner knowing in you already recognized before your mind caught up. I will read every comment. I will respond to as many as I can. Your reflection matters, not just to you, but to the community being built in this space. If you are not subscribed, press the button now and turn on the notification bell. Next week, I am going to reveal something that very few families outside the Sephardic tradition have ever been taught. A specific practice performed at the doorpost of the home during a narrow window of time each week, connected directly in the texts to the renewal of the household's financial protection. I have never shared this publicly before. If the bell is not on, you will not know when it arrives. And if this teaching reached something in you today, if something in you recognized my grandmother's words before I had finished speaking them, press the like button before you leave. This video was placed in your path today for a reason. Help it reach the next person it was placed for. One press of that button carries this to someone who is sitting tonight exactly where you were sitting before you found it. May you know who you are in your household. May the role of keeper be something you receive not as a burden, but as an honor. The oldest honor in this tradition, held by women whose names we have forgotten, but whose practice built everything we stand on. May the threshold of your home become a gate that provision recognizes and enters without hesitation. May what your grandmother knew, and perhaps never had the moment to tell you, reach you now, through these words, as if she were sitting on the edge of your bed, and may the house you build become the house your grandchildren tell stories about. Shalom.